On December 8th, 2019, the Florida State Seminoles announced Mike Norvell as the new head coach, signing a 6-year, $26.5 million contract. This comes after the firing of Willie Taggart, who by all accounts wasn't panning out at all. As his time with the team, he went 9-12 with 2 straight losing seasons, which was a pretty big deal at the time. The Noles hadn't suffered a below 500 season since 1976. Bobby Bowden's first year in his decorated 34-year career as head coach of the program. It was clear that the program was looking to reclaim their spot as one of the top dogs in the college football realm, and Mike Norvell looked like a solid candidate on paper. As his time in Memphis, he went 38-15, which was respectable. Fast forward to present day, the fan base is divided. Some still believe in Mike to take the program back to the top, while a select few want him kicked to the curb, which is not gonna happen. Sorry to burst your bubble, we can't afford to buy him out of his deal. Regardless on where you stand, we can all agree that Mike Norvell has given us the highest of highs, but damn it has he given us the lowest of lows. Join me as we look back in time at the start of the Mike Norvell era. It's the first season in the Mike Norvell era, and it was an interesting one. I feel like I don't gotta explain why. The program wouldn't even get to its first game before issues arose. Following the death of George Floyd and all the ongoing pandemonium, Mike Norvell made the declaration that he had one-on-one conversations with every player regarding the matter. One of the most respected and talented players on our roster at the time, Marvin Wilson, called bullshit on that claim and tweeted that no such talk occurred and that it was just a generic text. Mike Norvell would apologize 2 days later for misconstruing his words, and the team would move on as normal to a disappointing and forgettable year. After blowing a 10-0 lead to Georgia Tech in the second half, they would get ass blasted by 42 to the Canes 2 weeks later without Norvell in attendance, having tested positive for the coronavirus. And while the team did have their bright moments when they upset the then number 5 Tar Heels, it was abundantly clear that this so-called imposing defense was not great, having allowed 32.4 points per game, which would rise to 36 flat when it was all said and done. Fast forward to their game against NC State, this team found itself at 2-6, and with their next game being against a top 4 Clemson team, it was looking to be 2-7. But just hours before kickoff, the Florida State Seminoles called the game off, citing COVID-19 concerns with the Clemson squad. Dabo Sweeney, if you couldn't already tell, wasn't too thrilled to say the least, citing that this was just all an excuse as a way to duck the competition. Nonetheless, it was final and the game was cancelled. And so was the Noles' next game against Virginia. They would pick up a decent win against Duke, but with the season finale cancelled against Wake Forest, the season would come to an abrupt end, finishing a subpar 3-6. Not where you want to be at, but considering the circumstances, I give Mike Norvell the pass here, as it felt like a year 0 in the era instead of year 1. With the coronavirus behind them, the Noles looked on to their 2021 conquest. With a couple decent pickups from the portal and a recruiting class ranked 21st, the fans were optimistic for a better year, and that optimism would carry on into their first game where they took number 9 Notre Dame to the brink. But with FSU icing their own kicker, they would come up short in overtime, but no one really cared. They liked what they saw and saw their potential. So what happened the following game? What the fuck is going on? What was supposed to be a surefire win for the Noles, they would lose on the final play to Jacksonville State, an FCS team. As someone who saw this game as a student in person, this game was fucking painful. All of that optimism that was once built up immediately disintegrated, and with an 0-4 start, this looked like a season to forget. However, from then on, the team actually showed progression, mainly in the development in Jordan Travis, who took over the starting job and led the team to a 5-3 record in that span, but would fail to go bowling after their 24-21 loss to Florida, finishing the year 5-7. It was clear from then on that Jordan Travis was the man going forward, accounting for 22 touchdowns, 15 of which were passing touchdowns, with 6 picks on the year. For the first time in a long time, the fan base had legitimate hope, and they would eagerly wait for the 2022 season. The Seminoles would waste no time bolstering their talent. From the transfer portal, they got talents from the likes of Jared Verse, Tatum Bethune, Trey Benson, Johnny Wilson, Micah Pittman, and many more. On the recruited end, they did a better job than last year, picking up one of the best talents in Travis Hunter. Son of a bitch, you know what, Control-Z what I just said. Now we look onward to the games at hand. While the first game versus Duquesne was a snooze fest that came with a smackdown and a 90-minute rain delay, the game against LSU was absolute cinema, with the Noles blocking an extra point to win the game, which could have been avoided entirely if the Noles didn't pitch the ball up 7. The Noles would start 4-0 on the year and would be ranked in the AP poll for the first time in half a decade. They would sadly drop their next 3 games against ACC opponents, but from there on, the Noles would not lose another game, including a Jordan Travis masterclass in a 45-38 win versus Florida, where me and many others got to storm the field, something that hasn't happened in Doak since 1996. And sure, Florida wasn't the best and the Noles still had room for improvement, but this felt like the moment Florida State rose back to relevancy. And with a 10-3 record after a win versus Oklahoma in the Cheez-It Bowl, the team finished number 11 in the final AP poll. With most of the core returning, the team continued to add more talent to the roster. Players like Thentrell Cypress, Braden Fisk, Jaheim Bell, Keon Coleman. These guys made this team more lethal than ever. Ranked to number 8 to start the year, they would start the season off with a bang in a blowout win versus number 5 LSU. A game where Keon Coleman scored 3 times off 9 receptions for 122 yards. The team would continue to stack wins up. And while the games versus Boston College and Clemson weren't convincing, they would stay as a top 5 team throughout the year with a playoff spot in sight. But little did we know that one play would end the team's hopes for a championship. On November 18th, 2023, the Noles were set to play against North Alabama at Doak Campbell Stadium. A game that was supposed to be a dominant snooze fest got out of hand fast when the Lions jumped out to a 13-0 lead. And with about 2 minutes to go in the first, Jordan Travis would fight for some extra yards, but a hip drop tackle would lead to a severe leg injury that would see the end of Jordan Travis's college career. He would end up finishing 5th in Heisman voting, and the Noles would end up scoring 58 unanswered to go to 11-0. With Travis out, Tate Rodemaker would be the man going forward. And while he wasn't fantastic, he did do enough to get FSU to 12-0 with a 24-15 win against Florida in Gainesville, a game where Trey Benson scored 3 times. The writing appeared to be on the wall. They controlled their own destiny. All they had to do was beat Louisville in the ACC Championship with Brock Glenn due to Tate Rodemaker being out with a concussion. And while it was an absolute snooze fest for the most part, the Noles would beat Louisville due to their defense, as Brock Glenn finished the game 8 for 21 for 55 yards. With a 13-0 record, the CFP committee had a tough choice to make. Do they leave 1-loss Alabama out, 1-loss Texas out, or undefeated Florida State out? We all know what happens from here.
And Alabama returns to the playoff, and so we have another unprecedented situation as Florida State winds up at number 5. And Florida State is the first undefeated champion from a Power 5 conference.
This ended up being a big deal and is something still talked about to this day, because we have never seen this before. A Power 5 undefeated team being left out of the playoffs. Florida State fans were extremely pissed, citing favoritism to the SEC, and argued that they played quality opponents like Clemson and LSU. If you want my opinion, I think they deserved to make it, but I'd be crazy to say that they were a top 4 team at the time. They weren't, and the committee agreed. They were not the same team from when Jordan Travis was under center. Would we have gotten curb stomped by Michigan if we made the playoffs? Probably, but you can't base everything on hypotheticals. As a result of the snub, the Noles would play in the Orange Bowl against Georgia, who missed the playoffs after losing the SEC championship game to Alabama. Many of Florida State starters opted to sit out the game to prepare for the draft, which people didn't like as it gave them the impression that they quit on the team. I wouldn't go that far, since they are potentially risking their potential NFL career due to a potential freak injury if they went out there and played. The game would be a blowout as the Noles got destroyed 63-3, a joke that haters of the Noles use to this day. What started with hope ended with cruel emotions and has us questioning, what could have been? The 2024 Seminoles lost a lot of talent to the draft, 10 players to be exact. Those losses are ones you certainly cannot replace, but they tried their best. They got players like Malik Benson, Roydell Williams, and Marvin Jones Jr., and they looked to be difference makers on this team. However, the most important question is who would replace Jordan Travis? Enter DJ Uiagalelei from Oregon State, who was someone who was one of the top talents coming out of high school. However, in his time with Clemson and Oregon State, he was fine, not great, mainly due to his lack of mobility and accuracy issues. But hey, maybe a new system will realize his potential. Oh Jesus fucking kill me now. What was supposed to be a playoff contender for the new 12-team playoff, the Noles would start the year ranked number 10 in the nation, and they would begin their conquest as the most disappointing team this year by a country mile, as they would drop game after 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 fucking game. I could go into depth about why this team was next level terrible, but hell, I already made a 30-minute video bitching up a storm about it. All you need to know is that it would be easier to name what didn't go wrong rather than what did. An offense that was 4th worst in points per game at 15.4? Safe to say that watching the Noles offense should have been made illegal. But for me, it was like watching a plane crash. You want to look away, but you just can't. All we can do is accept what happened and use it as a stepping stone towards improvement. Next year. That's all that matters right now, right? The program is in a precarious position and the times are changing with NIL being a focal point. If you ask me how I feel about Mike Norvell, I still believe he can get the job done. With a new coaching staff, stadium renovations, and his promise for excitement, I don't see why we shouldn't buy in, as he seems like he's doing a lot of work to make sure that we don't go back to what we did last year. Because the way that season panned out, there is nowhere to go but up.